Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Sielheiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology. And we have our good friend Hannah Piper Burns back on today. She's been on a couple previous episodes that we'll link down below. So welcome, Hannah. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you, and I'm excited for our conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Yeah,
And
so
to
today we're gonna talk about, sorry,
no go.
exaltation and exalted planets. Um, so we already did an episode on domicile placements, and so what it's like to have a planet that is resourced, it's in its home sign. So now we're gonna kind of dive into exaltation and exalted planets because it's very similar thematically, but it is its own system. Um, yeah, do we want to start kind of how we did with the domicile episode, or do we want to go a different way?
I feel like what could be useful is to give a quick definition on like what it means for a
Mm-hmm.
planet to be exalted, and then
Yeah.
do what we did with the other episode and go through and
Yeah,
talk
going through the
about
planets.
each planet's exaltation. Does that sound good to
Mm,
you guys?
sure. And you
Totally.
all are much closer to the texts than I am in this moment, and like the classical definitions of these terms, I must admit.
Yeah.
But you have beautiful
I
metaphors,
think
Hannah, so you'll have a lot to share, I'm sure.
yeah, you do have the best metaphors.
Thanks.
Yeah. Alicia, I think you have the best definitions though for
I
this
probably
one.
do that
Probably.
Mercury on the
Yeah.
ascendant.
Yeah.
So continuing with the essential dignity like kind of lecture series is a big part of traditional Hellenistic astrology is looking at how well resourced a planet is to carry out its significations in an individual's life. And there's different places in the sky where planets are more and less comfortable because, if you're talking about Venus, Venus ideally wants to bring things together and create cohesion and pleasure and joy and harmony. And so if Venus is in, her own sign of Libra or Taurus, she's able to do that. But then the energy of Pisces, which is the sign where Venus exalts, is also an energy that's conducive to that sort of like wet, bringing together, leisurely pleasure energy. So Venus is very comfortable there. Whereas we'll do future episodes where we'll talk about detriment and fall, which would be places in the sky where planets are less comfortable and therefore less resourced to carry out their significations. And so, building off of our last episode, which we'll also link to down below if you haven't listened yet, that was where we talked about what it means to have a planet in its own sign, which is like like being in your own home and having all of your own resources that you're able to provide yourself. Whereas when planets are exalted, all of them except Mercury are exalted in signs that are ruled by other planets. So sticking with Venus, exalting in Pisces, Jupiter rules Pisces. So Jupiter exalts Venus. And one way that I heard it described, I believe this was in the astrology podcast episodes, not the astrology podcast, but the astrology with Kira.
Oh yeah,
Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
she goes by Kira. I'm sorry, I don't know her
Lauren,
last
yeah.
name, but yes, Taborn. I will link those down below because I believe this is where I got that metaphor, was in their episode on Venus. But like an exalted Venus would be like if you went into Sephora and then you just had all of these super fancy technologies to just like make yourself like you're like getting ready for a wedding and you have someone come and do your hair. And so it's like you're like lifted up. Exaltation really has to do with reputation. So when a planet is exalted, you're more likely to be seen and have a good reputation for whatever that planet is in charge of in your life. And the planet's given like a lot of resources to do what they want to do, but usually they're resources from other planets. So that it's
Mm-hmm.
helpful, but it's not that the planet's on their own terms. And so we can also get into the nuance of like, there's a lot that can be really
Yeah.
good about having a planet exalted, but it can also like, it's a long way to fall when you're up on the pedestal, and there can be a lot of pressure. And sometimes exalted planets can appear to be better than they actually are in reality. So is that a
Mhm.
good starting
Mm,
Yeah.
description of
very rich.
what that's
Yeah, I
like?
love that. Well, and I really wanted to share, Hannah, what you said to me a while ago about how a Pisces Venus, an exalted Venus, was like a party that was thrown in somebody else's house, but it
Mm.
Oh
was for
yeah.
you. So it was like, yeah, I love that metaphor. I use it all the time still.
Oh, thanks.
But basically, yeah, it was like
Yeah.
you, and you could probably tell it better, but I'll give it to you.
That's
You
yeah,
can
that's
share.
my that's my exaltation metaphor. It's like you are being
I
thrown a
love it.
party at someone else's house. So you don't have to clean up. Like it's just all in your honor. Um, but also people are like kind of at, it's like you having fun. It's all for you. Are you having fun? Are you loving it? This is great for you, right? And there's this
Yeah.
almost like there's almost a debt or like almost a feeling of needing to um
Have a
there's
good
also
time.
yeah, there's like a surveillance that's present that's like the mirror
Mm.
of like debilitation or fall where it's like instead of being sort of regarded side eye and like, hey, what are you up to? You're not doing it right. It's like the opposite of like it's almost like the gifted kid or something where it's like
Hmm.
there's a lot of expectation
Mm.
um that comes along with the
Yes.
resources.
That is so well
Yeah.
said. That makes me think I'm watching Silicon Valley right now, and
Oh
he
yeah.
like gets his startup going, and then like everyone wants to fund him after he wins this competition. And there's this episode where they're like at some big baseball field with this big party with a funder, and the funder is like trying to get him to take their money, and they just keep putting the camera on him, and then he's like up on the like big like World Series baseball screen, and someone's like giving him advice, and they're like, everyone's watching you. And he's like, yeah, everyone's watching me. And he's like, no, everyone's watching you right now. And the camera's just like on him. And he's like, so yeah, that can be how it can feel to have an exalted planet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I also I don't remember. It was from a NORWAC lecture, actually, I think, where I got this from. And it was a lecture that was like 3 years ago, but it was a talk about exalted planets, and they pointed out in the talk that every planet is exalted in a sign that is feminine, except for the Aries and Libra axis. So that is actually the only active or like yang signs, or masculine signs that have an exaltation planet
Mm.
assigned to them, whereas all of the other ones are all of the feminine, the yin, whatever you want to call them, the passive signs. So the water and the earth signs being those like more feminine passive signs, and the air and fire being the more masculine active signs. And that was like something that really blew my mind when I heard him say that, because it was something I'd never really realized or thought about before. So I think about that a lot, about how exaltations, I kind of almost associate exalted planets with feminine energy now,
Mm.
kind of because of that.
There's like something about
Which,
supporting and lifting up, like
yes.
the that more, and there's so many different words we can use to describe feminine
Yeah.
energy. And when we come from a Hellenistic background, like the Hellenistic astrologers used feminine and masculine as part of their techniques. So there's a way where we can
Yeah.
continue to
Right.
carry on that lineage and then also build upon it and expand what
Hmm.
our, understandings are of these words. But that, more like caretaker, supportive energy that exists
Hmm.
within all of us in different ways, and that being something that could like lift up and exalt others is really interesting.
And also,
Yeah, because I don't even think that was the point of the lecture, but that was like the takeaway I got from it. I was like, oh my God, wow, like the feminine signs are the ones that are exalted. Like, of course they are. Like, I don't know, that just like made so much sense to me. What were you gonna say, Hannah?
oh, it makes sense in the sense of like the when you think about the polarity of like the what is it, sun trifical and the other one where you're like outputting and then receiving.
Mm-hmm.
And those
Yes.
signs where like exaltation really is about that. It's kind of about getting like showered in a sense, or like, you know, you're going over a puddle and a rug is put down for you. Whereas like if you're in exile, like you're active because you are like trying to, every day is a survival, like you know, it's like a subsistence life. So when you're exalted, it's less about output and more about being able to, and also like being able to hold that, like that's something I think about a lot, being able to hold people's regard, people's expectation, people's attention. Attention can be really
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Yeah. Fair.
That's well said. Should we list off where all of the 7 traditional planets exalt
Are
as
exalted?
well?
Yeah.
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 So Saturn exalts in Libra, and then we have Jupiter exalting in Cancer, and we have Mars exalting in Capricorn, and the Sun exalting in Aries, and Venus exalting in Pisces, and Mercury exalting in Virgo. Mercury is the only planet that exalts themselves because Virgo is also Mercury's home sign, one of Mercury's 2 home signs. And then the moon exalts in Taurus. And so you can look to your planet, your birth chart, and you can see whether you have any natal planets in any of those signs, in any of the signs that they're exalted in. And you can also look at progressions. And we've done episodes on what secondary progressions are that you can go back and search for if you need more info on that. But you might have a planet, like I actually did just have a planet, Mars, my Mars in Sagittarius progressed into Capricorn. And so you might have your planet gain more dignity as your life progresses. And then we will all, as long as we live at least 28 years, have the moon exalted when she moves through Taurus by progression. And so looking at your chart and seeing if you have any planets exalted, and then looking at what houses those planets rule and what the topics of those houses are will give you a lot of information about like hidden gifts and talent. They might not be hidden, but you might not realize that those sorts of things might be easier for you or more fortuitous for you, or there might be some more benefit in some way, some more support or resourcing that others may not have. Because I study with Kelly Surtees, and she has a whole class on called like benefits and blessings in her certification program, where she really digs into how important it is to work with people when you're doing client work astrologically, to like highlight where strengths are for people and where gifts are, because sometimes we take them for granted. And so looking at where your exalted planets are can give you some understanding on where there might be a little bit more of a gift, especially based off of the topics of the house or houses that that exalted planet or those exalted planets, if you're, you know, really fortuitous, what are the topics of
Yeah.
those houses and how does that show up in your life?
Yeah. Awesome. Well said.
Thank you.
Cool. So go ahead.
Oh, do we want to talk
I was
about
going to say the same thing.
the planets and exaltation and in that
In
awesome
order.
Chaldean?
Yeah, dig through them and like, what does it mean to have Saturn in Libra? What does it mean to have Jupiter in Cancer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do one of you guys with a stronger Saturn want to start with Saturn?
Well, I have Saturn
Yeah.
in first, so got an angular
I have a
Saturn.
strong Saturn too.
Saturn friends unite.
Saturn friends. Yay. Yeah, so Saturn is exalted in Libra. So I guess with Saturn, this Saturn in Libra is something I actually think about a lot. I don't come across too many clients or anything that really have it, but it's something that I just think is so interesting because Libra is really the only sign that is ruled by a benefic, but then is exalted with a malefic. So I feel like it like has this duality that other planets and or other signs, I mean, like just don't really share.
Mm.
And I feel like we talked a lot about this in the episode we did with Lila, and the sixes and the story of Anana that we talked about a lot. But I think about Anana all the time. I love Anana. I'm always thinking about her, but I think about her story so much when I think about Libra, when I think about Venus, especially Venus in Libra, because that her story to me shows Saturn coming out in Libra. And so to like explain what I'm trying to say here, um, is that I feel like Libra, Venus and Taurus makes sense, right? Like Venus and Taurus, everything about it makes sense. But Venus and Libra, sometimes like there are pieces of it where I feel like it can get really people pleasing and it rules the other. And there's just like so many other things, but also it's an air sign. It's a very active sign. And so having that Saturnian influence kind of brings out that idea of justice. And, you know, with the tarot card too, that's associated with Libra being the justice card and like having this idea that Venus also can get revenge. Venus also can enact its anger in a productive way, but only if provoked, whereas Mars will just kind of attack to attack. And I feel like Saturn is very much like, I'll get you back. Like it's karma, right? Like it's like, I will get you for what you did, but it might take a while because I'm like really making sure it makes sense and I'm thinking about it first before just actively doing something. And so to me, that brings like such an interesting duality to Libra. And so my best friend is a Libra, and her Mercury is Libra also, which is her chart ruler because she's a Gemini rising. And I just think about that so often because she always said she doesn't relate to Libra. She never understood Libra. And the more, and this was obviously like 12 years ago, but the more I've understood astrology, the more I'm like, oh, you're a Libra, but you're the more Saturnian side of Libra. You're the more like, you know, you're such a different side of it. She also has her Scorpio Venus conjunct Pluto. So there's that. And a Moon Saturn conjunction too, actually, like you. But there's just that strong Libra energy in her that it just like it doesn't manifest as the very stereotypical Libra that is ruled by Venus that is in the media. It's very like the Saturn side of Libra to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes me think of the like common protest chant, no justice, no peace, which is also like bell
Yes.
hooks saying there can be no love without justice, I believe is that quote. And sometimes
Yeah.
justice can be cruel in certain ways, and it's not necessarily comfortable or easy. And then what was also coming up for me when you were sharing that was thinking about what Alice Sparkley Cat has said about Venus in their book Post-Colonial Astrology. And to be entirely
Mm-hmm.
honest, I have not read that book in a year or two, so I'm not going to try too hard to like paraphrase them. And I just would highly recommend
Yeah.
everyone go read that book.
Everyone should just read
But
that book.
yeah, but Ace
Required
does
reading.
talk a lot about how Venus was like this preferred planet of Rome. And I think Julius Caesar like
Mhm.
claimed that he was a descendant of Venus, and like the way that civilization can act, you know, it's very like we're cohesive if we're the Romans, like this like Venusian, Libran, like everything's all
Mhm.
right. We all, you know, feel good and get along, but then there's also violence that needs to happen to
Mhm.
enforce that sort of structure, and that feeling very Saturn and Libra as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I always think about aesthetics and how aesthetics are political, you know, and how
Mhm.
Saturn is like I think it's my teacher, Adam Allenbass, who talks about Saturn as like the castle village wall. It's both
Mm.
the inside and the outside. And
Yeah.
so there's like one part of it's the arbiter of the inside and the outside, basically. It's the threshold. And so aesthetics are a language that determines your status and where you sit, like in life, and there are all these
Mhm.
like micro, now it's like how high your socks are, that determine like if you're a millennial versus Gen Z, like that's one example, or like the aesthetics of wealth, and quiet
Mhm.
luxury, and the aesthetics of like nouveau riche, and like when we think about all the ways that we use the language of aesthetics to determine like somebody's position, that to me
Mhm.
is Saturn in Libra.
Mm. Makes a lot of sense too. And I was watching a TikTok the other day where somebody was talking about Instagram and how much Instagram has changed and how people are starting to prefer TikTok or like other medias. And somebody made a comment about how like Instagram is like almost like cringy to post on for some people now, and which I don't agree with, but I guess that's more of a Gen Z thing. And they were talking about it, and then this girl who I guess was an astrologer stitched it and she pulled up Instagram's chart, and I was actually really blown away by how many placements in Libra that Instagram had. And I was like, well, that tracks. Like it was basically
Absolutely.
everything from like the sun until like Mars or something. It was like half, like almost the entire chart was Libra. And I was like, Instagram like is Libra. Like that's how I'm gonna think of Instagram from now on. It's Libra. And it just, yeah, it's that duality.
Well, it's almost like it's like a camera, like a mimeograph machine, like a scale. Libra is a machine.
Yeah.
Libra's the
Yeah,
only,
it's
like the
non-human.
zodiac, like zoidos, the Greek word means like a living being or an animal. And Jason Hawley
Yeah.
will always talk about how the zodiac is this collection. It's like this ecosystem of how do all our animals live together? How do all our parts live together? And then yes, Libra is the one sign in the entire zodiac that is
Mhm.
not like a human or a mythical being or an animal. It's a machine. It's the scales.
I just got this image in my mind of like when there's like a wildlife camera that's installed, and like the animals are like coming up and like getting right, like putting their noses right up in it. You know what I mean? And like
Yeah.
those that's what it maybe how Libra feels in the Zoidos. It's like in the ecosystem, it's like all these animals hanging out, and then the wildlife camera that is
It's the camera
um
that's left in somebody's house to watch their dog.
yeah. Exactly. It's like
That's
yeah, it's a
funny.
mirror in a weird way too, which is very Venus. I mean,
Hmm.
Venus and her mirror. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, it also, another thing, just with all the exaltations that I like to think about is the
Hmm.
relationships between the planets
mm,
that come through with
Right.
that understanding, and how just like everyone hates on Saturn. I mean, Saturn's deeply unpleasant. I'm currently in my exact Saturn return and recovering from knee surgery, and like Saturn's not like a comfy energy to deal with, and I feel like Saturn's like this like creepy morose being kind of like lurking over here reminding us of life's responsibilities, and people are like shut up Saturn. And then Venus is the one planet that can come in and be like Saturn's not that bad, like come on guys, like Saturn can work, like there's like, because the thing is that Saturn is really good at building structures, at thinking of things that last, at I don't know. Can you guys list some other just like general Saturn significations? Like my going blank kind of.
doing things in integrity, not skipping steps, cutting corners. I always think of Saturn as a punk, like the ethos.
Yeah.
Like the ethos is really strong. There's like an austerity to the ethos. Yeah.
Yeah. Delays and restrictions too, like places where you feel restricted from fully doing something unless you put a lot of work or energy into it.
Have you
Yeah,
ever heard
might
of
like it's not gonna be easy.
Dog Me 95 films?
Mm-mm.
They there was this like I think it's Danish Scandinavian film collective, and they like had this manifesto of like trying to make films that like had only the lighting that was in the scene, only clothing that the actors like owned. Like it was the super austere like manifesto of like how to make um films that were like trying to get at some sort of like realism. And in the credits they'd have to like reveal how they broke the rules to make the film too, like this is how I failed. um and that
Mm.
feels very Saturnian, like this idea of like I have a manifesto and like i I know I'm going to fail, um
Mm-hmm.
but I'm gonna fail. It's worth failing, which feels very opposite the sun's exaltation in Aries.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's well said. And
Yeah, I like that.
yeah, Libra just gives Saturn the resources to do these Saturnian things well. And I think also
Mm-hmm.
softens the harshness of Saturn because Saturn can be really, really unfair. And then Libra is all about fairness. Like as a Libra rising with a lot of planets in my
Mm.
first house, like I just remember being a little
Mm-hmm.
kid and I mean, I'm sure most of us have these memories, but like just like the deep grief and anger when you learn like, oh wait, life isn't actually fair. Like things aren't fair. And like Libra as an air sign can be so logical and like, well, it should be this way and this way. And it can like, Libra also likes to consider all sides, which can help to soften Saturn. So there's this really
Mm-hmm.
interesting relationship we have between Venus and Saturn, where Venus gives Saturn, in Libra, Venus gives Saturn the tools to do their job really well, but then also kind of softens some of the harshness at times. I mean, can anyone really soften Saturn? But maybe Venus can a little bit.
Yeah. It definitely feels like it can a little bit, like especially with that, like the Venusian energy almost brings out the creative side of Saturn. It's like it's
Hmm.
still gonna be Saturnian, but it's gonna be pretty.
Well,
Like put a bow on it.
we've been super thorough with Saturn, which is everything that she deserves.
Indeed.
But
Hmm.
do you guys have any last thoughts on that before we maybe shift to Jupiter?
No?
Gen X. I feel like um, most of this people that have Saturn in Libra that I know are Gen X, late
Yeah,
Gen X. So
Beyonce.
Sure.
if you want to feel out the Saturn in Libra vibe, Gen X.
Go hang with them. Go listen to some Beyonce.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Okay. Jupiter in Cancer. Um, yeah, so Jupiter loves to make life, loves to make things bigger, loves to say yes and create a really nurturing environment for things to grow and expand.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
Jupiter and the moon just have such a strong relationship with the moon exalting Cancer because the moon gives Jupiter bodies to like bring his energy forth and to like bring that into the
Mm.
world. And my mom actually is a Sag rising with Jupiter and Cancer, which is a really interesting dynamic. But being
Yeah.
Jupiter and Cancer, I feel like the people I know with those placements they're incredibly generous and incredibly hopeful. And there's this watery softness that can come through. And this, Cancer's so caretaking. But
Mm-hmm.
you can really, with the exaltation, you can also really see how like a very strong Jupiter I have Jupiter in Sag, so which is its own nuance too to have Jupiter in their own sign versus exalted. But Jupiter can be way too much. Like Jupiter is a big gas ball, can be really overwhelming, can be way too much. And then especially in the moon sign and exalted, it just is like there can be like I think there's so many millennials who have this really interesting opposition between Jupiter and Cancer and Saturn and Capricorn, and so many of them
Yeah.
are very successful. And like my mom was exalted in her career and was like the director of the library which also fits because her moon is in Virgo, right? Because then you,
Mhm.
especially with an exalted Cancer placement, like where's your moon? What's your moon doing? What phase is your moon? What house is your moon in? What sign is she in?
Yeah.
How it's her dignity? Is she exalted in Taurus? Which that's Frida Kahlo.
Mm.
Um, but
Mhm.
it can also be, if your moon's maybe not in the best condition, you could be like excessively generous, or there's too
Yeah.
much Jupiter, like you need a container for Jupiter as well. And I don't think that Cancer is always going to be helpful with containing Jupiter. So that can be an example of when planets being exalted might like look or sound like they're really good, but then the actual lived experience of the native might also bring some difficulty with having that sort of placement.
Yeah, that's well
Yeah,
said.
yeah. I always think of Jupiter and Cancer as the politician's placement, and I believe that that's the
Mm.
Sibley chart, US Sibley chart. Jupiter is in Cancer,
Oh, yeah, I
exalted.
think you're right.
Also, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is one of
Yes.
those like Saturn and Cap, Jupiter and Cancer oppositions. And she's
So is
a
Taylor Swift.
Sag rising, so like that Jupiter rules
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
AOC. But yeah, Taylor Swift is one of
Pretty
those as
sure
well
Biden also, I'm pretty sure Biden also has Jupiter in Cancer.
as a Sag rising.
Oh, interesting.
And when you think about the moon, in many
Mm.
in many astrologies, the signification of the moon is the people,
Mm.
Hmm.
the populace, you know? It makes sense. Like Jupiter exalting in the moon sign would be a political placement. I also think about like,
Yeah.
mm, there's this like, thing where US politicians, specifically, I should say, I haven't looked at politicians from other countries and where their Jupiter placement is. But I think it's interesting that it mirrors the US in the like these
Mm.
US politicians it mirrors the US placement, and also this idea of how the US has this incredibly high defense budget, which to me speaks all about shadow Cancer of just like the shell. Like to me, Cancer is also very much about like
Yeah.
who is the family, who gets the resources, who's protected, who's in um who's encircled in the protection. Um and so there's that like exaltation of Jupiter in Cancer that's just like, I need more. I need that Jupiter being the expander ray, like
Mm.
more bombs, please. More, more bases, please. Um,
Yeah.
and but there's also the idea of the idea of the people, and like being someone who the people trust and count on. And like I think about AOC really positioning herself as someone like of the people and doing her like Instagram lives where she's like at the beginning of her career, where she was like making mac and cheese and talking about like what it's like to be in Congress, for people. She's like, okay, so it was my first day, here's what it was like, and that's just so that feels very like, again, of the people.
Yeah. But it's like of the people you care about,
Yeah.
not the other people.
Yes, of the people you care about.
Yeah. That's very, I mean, my Cancer placements relate to that for sure.
And also the nostalgia of Cancer, or just like the sort of, the I think a lot about Cancer and like the kind of both the wax and wane of like
Hmm.
the lunarness of it, of like the kind of um yeah, periods of abundance and scarcity, but also like
Yeah.
when I think about, I don't know, I always think about Cancer as like layers of history, and like the histories and the parts of culture that are not passed down necessarily in text, but are like
Mm.
language, cooking, like lore, recipes,
Mm.
fairy tales, mythology, that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
Jupiter really likes grand unified theories of everything. And that's kind of like I feel like a very, every family is its own country too, with its own politics and currency and language.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, beautifully said. Any
Yeah.
other thoughts on Jupiter and Cancer before we do Mars?
I don't think so.
Awesome. Yeah, so then Mars exalts in Capricorn, which I have by progression, and I've only had it for a few months, and I will have it by progression for like 50 years or something, like a long time. So like
Nice.
I have a whole
Settle
lifetime to
in.
like learn how this new energy feels. But I remember when I was first learning the exaltation scheme, and I have this good friend who has like so much Aries, including Mars in Aries. And I was like, like Mars and Capricorn, like that doesn't fully make sense to me. And they brought up martial arts as a really good
Mhm.
example of to exert your Mars energy if you give it a structure, right? Capricorn loves structures, and you have rules and regulations of how you can hit and this and that, and like what's the best way to exert your force and energy to make the most impact. Like the structure of
Mm.
Capricorn really provides like the container for that.
And it's a
And
discipline with steps. Like to me, that feels very Saturnian. Like
yes,
you don't
Right,
get
the
to
the
move
belts.
up until you're like ready. You don't get access to certain knowledge or certain techniques or certain until you prove you're like worthy of them.
Right.
yeah, I've been saying that so much as I've been transitioning into this energy is my life really feels like I'm a skier and I just love to climb mountains and slide down them, and it's like you're hiking up and you put one step after the other and eventually you'll get to the top, but it might kind of suck in the meantime at certain points, but if you keep going, like you will get there slowly but
Yeah.
surely. The mountain
Yeah,
goat.
well, and yeah, I think about that a lot with acro too, because like people will come once or twice and then be surprised with how much you actually can do on day one, but then frustrated that they can't do more than the basics or something like that. And it's just like, well, no, it takes practice. Like it takes a lot of work for so many skills, so many of these like, so many movement practices take a lot of just repetition, having to do it over and over and over until it looks good, until it makes sense, right? And I just feel like that's one of those things that Mars and Capricorn like really understands well.
It's also really interesting for me to think about Saturn exalting a planet because I don't know,
Hmm.
she's a tough teacher. Like she's not going to lift everyone up, and
Yeah.
like no other planet is exalted by Saturn. Whereas, we were talking about Venus exalting Saturn. Venus also exalts the moon in Taurus, right? And Venus would love to exalt other planets, but the interesting relationship between the malefics of Saturn exalting Mars, actually. And then when we get to talking about detriment and fall, Mars puts Saturn in fall in Aries.
Mm.
And that's just an interesting dynamic as well. But the way that like Saturn's kind of cool, calculated, process based system is really useful for Mars. And then Mars's fire and energy and impulse really lights up Capricorn because Capricorn, like the Capricorns are the people out there who are just like silently grinding and then they just come out with excellence and they're just like way beyond
Mhm.
everyone else in what they've accomplished because they've just been working at it, and they're like Leo
Right.
too, but Leo's like look at me and Saturn's like don't look at me. Capricorn's like don't look at me,
Yeah.
like I'm working, and then once I'm excellent you can see it. And that, Capricorn is a cardinal sign. Like it wants to take initiative, it
Mhm.
wants to move towards something. And then when you put the fire and energy and drive of Mars into it, it really gives it a spark to accomplish really impressive things.
Yeah, and it's the only sign that has both of the malefics. Like its ruler and its exaltation are
Mm.
both malefics.
Yeah, it's a malefic sign.
And I like to think of it as like, well, okay, so like Saturn loves to make you suffer. Let's face it, Saturn is suffering, and Mars is
True.
a martyr. Mars likes to suffer. for something. And in that way, I think there's a like almost a response to the, it's like how like a drill sergeant or someone who really brings out like a side of you through pain.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily like that's not a relationship I'm into, but like that's a relationship that exists out there, and it's like also the old meeting the young. I think about a lot with Saturn
Mm.
and Mars, like Saturn as time, as Chronos, meaning sort of the like I always think of the Aries of Mars at least as like the baby, you know, the youth. Um, but also I think about, you know, Capricorn has a tail. Capricorn has this very mystical side that is
Mhm.
also kind of the wild, like I always think of like the Witch of the Wood or like the
Mhm.
sort of Princess Mononoke, like nature as Saturn, like
Mhm.
entropy and deep wisdom. And it's interesting to think about Mars, which I think used to be associated with agriculture at one point,
Mhm.
um, which is almost the opposite of like the wilderness. And so it's like, oh, how does that work? Like how does a planet of like enacting your will in the world, executive function, thrive so much in the wilderness?
Yeah, and I think about well, I've been working a lot with in the book, I was working with Pan. And I
Mm.
really associate Pan, I mean, like with the devil card in tarot for sure, but like I feel like because he is half goat, like he has a lot of those associations that feel very Capricorn, and he's part of the Capricorn constellation too. So when I think about Capricorn energy now, I've been thinking a lot about how like Pan fits into that story. Um, and I mean, that's something I feel like I could talk about for an hour, but it's such an interesting parallel because Pan, like, is the, like, I feel like he's seen so often as this bad guy, like, as a devil, but then there's this other side of him that was, like, just a nature god who was just minding his own business. So it's like, there is this, like, really weird duality of, like, being blamed and being, like, pointed fingers at, but then did he do anything wrong? Like why do we think he is this? And there's just so much duality within just like Pan's story and yeah, and I've been really deeply going into like Peter Pan too because that's kind of where he came from. And I've just been getting a lot of Peter Pan syncs anyway, so been diving into that. But this whole idea like from Peter Pan of the shadow I've been finding really interesting because like they literally talk so much about his shadow and how the shadow like follows him, but like what if the shadow is like the darkness or the evil, the bad, like the negative sides of Pan, but then like, you know, he has this like other side of him that like is very smart but also very immature, and there's a lot of stories where Pan is, you know, the Disney version. He's very like PG, he's whatever, but there are a lot of darker versions of the story where he's a villain. He's really bad and he like brings kids to Neverland where they can never escape. So it like kind of shows this duality. This is just how my brain has been for the past few weeks, but I've just been using the Peter Pan symbolism and then Pan's story to kind of like help me understand some Saturnian themes in Capricorn. It's like a
Well,
general whole.
that makes me think about, I think it's Jason Hawley that talks about like red Mars and black Mars and like the two sides of Mars. And in
Hmm.
some ways, that makes me think about Capricorn and the goat and the tail. and how
Yeah.
like maybe Mars exalts there because there's this like
Duality.
there's the out, like I always think about Mars as the drill, so it's like the drilling out and the drilling in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Climbing out,
Yeah.
climbing in, like rappelling into the abyss versus scaling the mountain.
Shifting
Yeah.
gears a little, but still sticking with the Mars and Capricorn, just to give kind of a technical explanation of like when I said earlier, if you have an exalted planet natally or by progression or some
Mm.
other timing technique you may use, looking at the topics of the houses that that planet rules to see how that might show up for you. And just sharing personally that like when my Mars progressed into Capricorn and became exalted with and I'm a Libra rising, so one of the houses that Mars rules for me is my seventh house of relationships, and within like a month of that happening, I got into what seems like will be like it's a really great relationship. It's felt really great so far, and it's like pretty early on, but it seems like it's like the potential to have a good quality relationship is
Mm-hmm.
like more available to me now that the ruler of my seventh house has progressed into exaltation. But then also
Mm-hmm.
remembering that like exaltation can be like larger than life as well, and holding the context for like what that means as well,
Yeah.
and just continuing to see as this planet moves through the progression. But that's where looking at, okay, this planet is in charge of these topics. What does that mean for the potential of those topics in my life if they do have that exalted placement?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really interesting.
Um, cool. Anything else about Mars and Capricorn?
No, I
Well,
don't
the
think so.
sun exalts in Aries. Lori, do you want to maybe say something about that with your moon in Aries?
Oh, yeah, I attract a lot of Aries people, for sure. I, yeah, let's see. So I feel like, I mean, just in my circus work alone, I will say I have so many students that are either Leos or Aries that come to me. I get a lot of fire signs in general, but Aries energy does tend to be more attracted to, I guess, to what I do because it is very playful, it is very childlike, and then there is this like really creative side, but also you're working out at the same time. And so I feel like acro alone is like such a funny metaphor for Aries energy as just like a general blanket statement. Um, because that's something I've been thinking about a lot. With the Peter Pan thing too, because it's this like never grow up type of energy, which I feel like is once again also very Aries, very Mars, very like I'm just gonna keep doing this for the rest of my life and it's gonna be fine. Um, and I feel like Aries suns, they do get a lot of it's almost like the attention that Leos want sometimes. Because I feel like when I think about the sun, when I think about Leos, I think about how the sun is so bright. Like you can't look at the sun. You can't see it. You're gonna go blind if you look at the sun.
Swallows
So there's
planets when they
this
get too
like
close.
exactly. And so yeah, like any other planet by the sun, by definition, then is under the beams. It disappears. It's not able to bring about its significations as well because it's hidden. It's being like absorbed. And so that's Leo energy, especially that like 12th house and 8th house suns that we've talked about a lot before too. It's that blinding energy where you can't see. And in those particular cases, it's casting a shadow. But even like when it's at the top of the sky, it's so bright. It's so there. But I think about that with Leo. I don't think about that as much with Aries because I feel like Aries is like almost just like handed the attention that like Leos strive for, or like Leos like want, or I don't know quite how to word this, but do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
Does that make
that
sense?
that makes sense to me. And just to continue with that
Yeah.
riff, like it currently is Leo season right now, and in the northern
Mm-hmm.
hemisphere, that's July and August, and it's so hot. Like it's just
Yeah.
like too hot, whereas Aries season in the spring, it's like that sunlight, it's really nice after the winter, right? And also the fact that the sun
Yeah.
exalts in the sign where like Aries starts with the spring equinox when the days are equal, and now
Mm-hmm.
the days are getting longer and the sun is moving towards the solstice and the most strength.
Sounds
And so the
funny.
sun's exalted with that amount of
Yeah.
light, but then you get to Leo season and it's like the sun's almost like too hot to handle at that point. So
Right.
there's like some tempering maybe. I mean, I wouldn't call Aries tempering at all, but there's something about the time of the year
Mhm.
that might help the sun in that way.
Yeah, it's less harsh.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it's more welcomed, or like
Yeah.
it's instead of like the high summer sort of like, ugh, it's like the return of the sun and they're like, oh my God, the crocuses, they're poking out. Um,
Yeah.
fire signs, it's interesting. I feel like, well, first of all, the sun, being associated with like the ideal image in the mind or something like the because of that sort of, all the other planets have phases, and the sun is just
Yeah.
you
It's a
know
constant.
yeah, and that gives it some of that frozen in time youthfulness in a way,
Mm-hmm.
partially because it like doesn't have a cycle in that way. um
Yeah.
I mean, it has a daily cycle, but it doesn't like wane or,
Right.
you know and but also it's like that into there's an intuition to fire signs that is not, it's not like a watery intuition. It's like a physical intuition of like, I know when I make this jump across this like chasm that I'm going to be able to make it, or like I'm going to reach for the
Mm-hmm.
rock and I know that I'm going to grab the hold because I like have like a kinetic intuition. um
Yeah.
and I think there's a, like, again with Aries being the baby, like babies don't think about whether it's okay for them to want what they want, or like, you know what I mean? They
Yes.
just want it.
Yeah.
They just express it.
Right.
There's like no, and that feels very much like fire intuition. Like there's no hesitation. You're
Mm-hmm.
not thinking. It's the intuition of like no brain, just like I am not overthinking this. I am in the flow. I'm in the kinetic flow.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was meandering, but like, yeah, so
No.
it's almost like the sun exalts in Aries because it is the like you have the image and you're expressing it um without mediation.
Yeah, so I was actually having a very similar conversation with our friend Lola about this the other day. But she is a Leo sunrise baby. So her sun is like right on the horizon line. But then she also has Mercury and Mars there. So she has a lot of Leo. But we were talking about how like her being a Leo rising, me being a Cancer rising, being ruled by the sun and moon, having that duality between each other. Um, and we were joking that the sun has to set. And so she has like a social battery, basically. Like when it runs out, when her battery runs out, like, and it doesn't necessarily coincide with the actual sun, but like when her battery runs out, she needs to go set. She needs to go be alone. She needs to like burn out. And she does experience really intense burnout. Whereas, like, I'm ruled by the moon. I also have my Mars on the ascendant, and I'm ruled by Aries. So I have that like very similar, like Aries and Leo are so similar, but they're also so different. And I feel like I'm constantly in a state of changing, and like who even knows? Like my mood changes every 5 minutes. I don't know what I need or want. I forget to eat. I forget to do things. Like, but that like very primal like baby energy is actually something that really changed my life when I finally started realizing that like I needed to just allow that to like control me and just be what it was going to be, instead of like almost like putting out the Aries fire of like, you get this impulse and you're like, I have to do this right now. And it's like there was a part of my life where I was like, no, that doesn't make sense. And now I'm just like, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna go here now because I have an impulse and I'm just gonna act on it. And like 9 times out of 10, they're healthy or it's fine. And yeah, like I have just felt so much happier and more aligned in the like 5 years of understanding my Aries moon and like allowing myself to live like that. And so I think about that exalted sun being as part of that too, because I feel like, yeah, there's just so much between that like Leo and that Aries. And then also the sun and the moon duality too. Like there's so much to be said about that because I don't feel like I ever need to set, but I have new moons. Like I need the sun to shine. The moon isn't anything unless the sun is shining on it.
Well, the moon is plenty of things, but she's not visible.
She's not visible. You wouldn't be able to see her. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, but that was also beautifully said, Lori. And it really makes me think too of the like Aries being cardinal. And if we're thinking of
Yes.
different images of the types of fires that the three fire signs are, Aries is the match. And then, you light it, you spark it, you go with it, and then it burns out and you need a nap. And the sun, like kind of enjoying getting to be in that cardinal energy because the sun's in charge of self-expression and ego and sense of self and identity and how we shine in the world, and just being able to kind of go with your impulses and like do your little Aries things works really well for the sun's energy. Whereas the sun, like in fixed signs, right? Like in Leo, it seems like, Leos might have a bit more of pressure and feeling like they need to be really consistent and steady in how they're seen and how they're showing up. Or I have my sun in Scorpio, so I've also been kind of meditating here on the relationship between Mars and the sun and how Mars exalts the sun, which is also interesting to have, another malefic planet exalting the sun, which, right, Mars and the sun have pretty similar energetic qualities as far as being hot and dry. Mars is just a bit more extreme than the sun most of the time. But then, like the sun in Scorpio, which is also ruled by Mars, is not exalted. And part of that maybe being like the fact that it's a water sign and the sun would obviously prefer to be in a fire sign. But then also the fixed quality that Leo and Scorpio share, and how, just how the sun apparently really enjoys being cardinal, but can't consistently be that because the sun is the steadiest planet in the solar system. And we do rely on him to like rise and set, in a predictable manner. So.
Yeah. Well, and we have a friend too that is also a Leo rising. Eric, he was saying that he feels like sometimes being a Leo rising, like being the sun, he feels like he has to be entertaining, but then he has to set too. Like he has to like, because it's like when you are out, everyone's looking at you, like everyone's paying attention to you. But then when you are set, you can actually be yourself. And so I feel like there is a little bit of that, like that consistency, but then when you add in that Mars energy, it can get frustrated if it's not seen the right way. Or, if somebody sees you while you're trying to set, like that could be really difficult. Like, how do you invite somebody into your home with that? Or like that kind of almost like that's how I've been thinking about it. And speaking of Leos, I have a almost birthday boy with the zoomies right now, so sorry. Sorry if he's loud.
You're good. I can't hear him.
Oh, great. He's psycho.
Well, and then there's like a whole thing about dignity and overculture too, right? Like something that watching a lot of reality TV has taught me is that a lot of how dignity expresses itself in our culture is how it's like not how you do things, it's how people receive how you do things. And like to me, the sun exalting in Aries, in Western culture, quote unquote, which is, you know, Hellenistic astrology is kind of a product of a dialogue between cultures that eventually established the Western hegemony of the world. But you know, I think about Aries and the sort of rugged individualism and the like entrepreneur, like this idea of the entrepreneur, the rugged individualist, the, you know, the person doing it on their own. Again, that like crocus poking up through the grass, like that's something that we really as a culture value. And so when you're setting yourself to do things like that, to do Aries things, like it's very, it's often very rewarded.
Yeah.
And we often reward people who just take it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like being rewarded for behaving the way you are expected to behave, or what people expect from you, which actually might also be a good transition into Venus and Pisces too, because I feel like that's very literal with Venus and Pisces, of behaving in ways that people want you to, and like a sweet, hopeful, compassionate, connective energy, and then that being really helpful for Venusian topics. Whereas like my Venus in Scorpio, who's going to be a lot more like independent and assertive, and a little bit more of a fighter, like she's not rewarded for that societally, because that's not how Venus energy is expected to show up.
You think about Venus and Libra too, like in domicile, and it like, and both Libra and Taurus and Libra, I'm sorry, both Venus and Taurus and Venus and Libra, like there's a point at which Venus says enough. And there is not a point in Pisces. Like Pisces is not a sign that ever says enough. That's enough.
I
That's
feel
it.
personally called out here.
Sorry. Am I wrong?
No. No. And honestly, like that's something that cracks me up too, is like my Pisces Venus is like the funniest part of my chart to me, because I am so Mars, Saturn, Moon. Like that's my whole chart. And then I just have this Pisces Venus at the top of my chart with my MC, and it's the first thing everybody always notices. Like anytime anybody ever looks at my chart, they're like, "What a cute little Pisces Venus." And I'm like, what? Like, what about that? Like, it's just so funny to me because it's so Venus and Pisces that is just the first thing everyone just gushes over about my chart. And I'm like, what about that? Like, don't you see the whole rest of my chart? Like, there's so many other things that I feel like I would put to describe me before that, but it's always the first thing everybody comments on, and it always is followed with "that's so cute" or "that's so sweet," or how, you know, it's just like I get the cutest little compliments about that Pisces Venus, and I'm like, I make fun of her 24/7. Like she is my like one planet that I'm like, how is she even here? So yeah,
Venus
that
and Pisces
is
definitely is cute. It's like the cute little like
yeah.
animal in the woods that you just want to like help and protect, you know, and whereas you're not like looking at, I don't know, a cockroach and being like, I want to help you, you know.
This is heavy. So sorry in advance, but it also makes me think of like the like, okay, I saw this awful clip years ago of a baby dolphin that like all these people on a beach were passing around and they
Yeah.
killed it.
Yeah.
And to me, that feels like the others, like an exalted Venus, the shadow of an exalted Venus is like, you're, again, everybody wants to hold you up, everybody, but when you're fragile, when you're like, you know, that's like you have to be, you almost have to be tough to,
Yeah.
or wild to evade that kind of, like intensity of regard.
Yeah. I so heavily actually relate to that. And I've seen that clip. I know what you're talking about. So I have my Jupiter in Libra, so it's in a mutual reception to my Pisces Venus. and my Venus is 8 degrees away from my moon, which is my chart ruler, with my MC 4 degrees from both of them right in the middle. And so I feel like I have been put on a pedestal by a lot of people, particularly like with that fourth house Jupiter. Like it feels like sometimes with my family, because I was the first like grandchild from my generation. Like I was the first baby. Like there's always, I'm the only girl on one side. Like there's so many like factors of like, yeah, this like almost like Simba, like, look at this baby. But then sometimes I feel like nobody actually listens to me. Or like I'll be like, oh, here's who I actually am. And they're like, no, no, you're just the cute little Pisces Venus. And I'm like, no, but I have ideas. And then it's like, no, your ideas are wrong. Like our ideas are right. And that's been something I feel like I've dealt with a lot with because it also rules my 11th house too. So it's happened like it has happened in like friends and groups and stuff too. But there have been moments where I just feel like there have just been me being put on this pedestal, and then I'm just like, wait a minute, like, no, but you're not actually listening to what I'm saying. I want to be seen for what I'm, for my Aquarius placements, right? Like what I think, what I feel, what I'm saying, not my little Pisces Venus at the top of the chart.
Well, we just had a little bit of a technical difficulty, so we paused the recording and we're back now. But I believe we were just chatting about kind of the nuances of having an exalted planet being able to bring
Yeah.
you so much, but then also the difficulties or limitations of, again, like Venus and
Yeah.
Pisces has to
Pisces.
respond to Jupiter, right? Like Jupiter
Hmm.
is the one who's in charge of what Venus is doing. And while Jupiter and Venus, like Jupiter will exalt Venus and help her out a lot, Jupiter is like too good to be true, like big energy, expansive, and can be like, go, like Hannah pointed out, Pisces has no
Yeah.
limits. Like it is the ocean. Like Jupiter is just a gas
Yeah.
body with no limits. And so then Venus
Yeah.
has to deal with that Jupiterian energy. And it like Jupiter's also so hopeful and optimistic and sees it's like rose-colored glasses in
Yeah.
Pisces especially. There's really good things that can happen with that of people just looking at Lori and being like, "Oh, you're so cute, you're so Venus," and like seeing the best. And then Lori's like, "I'm actually really intellectual, okay?" Like
I'm actually really Mars, okay? Yeah, no, that's like my entire life. And it can be another thing I wanted to say, it can be very quantity over quality. Like
Mm.
I felt like something that I dealt with a lot in like high school especially, but when I was younger, was like a lot of people liking me, like a lot of people asking me out or constantly like liking me, but it was never like what I wanted, or like, I didn't want that attention. I would be like, okay, like I'm trying to do this project. And it like always really irritated me too, because that's always been a question I've always gotten, like, oh, who are you dating? What are you doing? Like all these things. And I was like, and then they're like, so many guys like you though. And I'm like, no, but like, but I'm doing this project. Like, here's this thing I've created. Like, I felt like so much of my life has been that, and like trying to weed out friends who only ask who I'm dating, or like, or on, things like that, where I'm just like, it drives me absolutely insane that, well, and that's like a typical thing for a lot of women, I think, anyway. But that was always like a big part of that Pisces Venus that I attribute, because it was just like attracting a lot of attention, but like unwanted attention. And it was never like what I wanted it to be. It was always just like too much. But then like they didn't always leave me alone when I would ask to be left alone, and it would make me want to like hide. And I'd be like, how can I, which you can't hide when your chart ruler moon in Aries and Venus are on your MC. Like there's no hiding. And with the two mutual receptions too, it just was like I was always seen. And like the moon, right? I'm always seen. And my eighth house sun, I'm always seen. So it just was like that was a big thing that I feel like I think about a lot with that Pisces Venus too.
interesting because I have a domicile Venus in Libra and
Mm-hmm.
12th, but that was something that I struggled a lot with in high school would be like being called really flirtatious, and I was like
Yes.
so puzzled by it. I was like, I am literally just being friendly. Like, please don't
Right,
get
right. I'm being nice to you.
it's bizarre. But like that projection, something else I see sometimes with exalted Venus is like idealism, that Jupiterian um
Mhm.
like that it doesn't necessarily always have to do with romance, but that sort of like
Mhm.
again need to have like love look a certain way or be big and epic
Mhm.
and sweeping and like
Yes.
you know felt on a metaphysical like level. um
Mhm.
Sometimes I also see things like you know Venus has some other shadows. I'm not saying this is you, Lori,
Mm.
but I've
Not
seen things
offended.
shopping addiction or like a lot of vanity.
Mm.
Um
Yeah.
Or like
and
sugar
again,
addiction as well. Venus loves
yeah,
sweets, maybe
sugar
just
addiction.
eating too
Yeah.
much of something that's really tasty. Especially Pisces deals with so many addictions. So overindulgence could
Mhm.
totally be a. Lori has plenty of other things to maybe mitigate that,
Yeah.
but some people with Venus in Pisces or Jupiter in Cancer for that matter, like those
Yeah.
like exalted benefics can totally be overindulgence.
Right. Yeah, I feel like my Chiron in the second opposite Saturn very much is like, no, we're not spending money. Like, what do you mean? Um, and I definitely grew up in a household that didn't have sugar. Really, like I didn't have access to sugar. So, yeah, none of those things really resonate with me, but I have seen them in other people, absolutely.
And another shadow side of any exalted planet that I'm reflecting on right now is privilege and the conversation about what it
Yes.
means to have privilege and how like exalted planets, also planets in domicile, like when you have a or other dignified planets, when you have a planet that's very
Mhm.
dignified, that can represent privilege in relationship to whatever that planet signifies. And it can be very much
Mhm.
like Lori's experience of like, I didn't ask for you guys to all like me or to like talk to me or this or that. Like I didn't ask for it, but then you have it and it is like a boost. And
Mhm.
then how do you hold that privilege and how do you work with that, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, and
yeah.
I feel like for me, like I've spent so much time and energy like understanding that like if I'm going to be seen anyway, if I'm going to get this attention, then I want to get ahead of it. I want it to be me being seen for what I'm good at, for what my talents are, for what I'm saying, for my intelligence, for my wisdom, right? I have a palace on on my sun too. Like that I want that like palace view. I want people to see me as the like the smart person or the whatever, but it still ends up often like not being that way. But I mean, there's definitely been both extremes, but yeah, there's been a lot of like, how can I mitigate this? Like, I've spent so much energy in my life being like, okay, how can I be seen for this? And like, if I'm gonna get this unwanted attention, how do I make it wanted attention? How do I make it, like, how can I mitigate it? How can I like almost like dangle something shiny in front of people? And I think that's a big part of like where acro came from, or like my dance classes, my movement classes. Like if I'm gonna get a bunch of people there, then like I'm gonna do something fun or silly or like whatever. Like make it more of an Aries thing, like try to pass the ball off to the moon. Like yeah, it's like how do you mitigate that if you're gonna have that attention, if you're gonna have those followers almost.
Which
It's
can
very
also be
weird.
a part of having a dignified planet is like we're talking about the
Mhm.
nuance of how it can make some things easier, some things harder. but the planet is well resourced to do what it's in
Yeah.
charge of doing. And so going in and like figuring out some sort of mitigation or management or way to deal with the difficulties that come with that planet's dignity, like
Hmm.
it's a lot easier to do that when you have an exalted planet or a planet in domicile, whereas when you have a planet in exile or fall, mitigation might be a lot harder to access.
Yeah, absolutely.
Should we move on to Mercury? Any other Venus thoughts?
I think so.
Kind of look like you're thinking, Hannah.
Oh,
I do.
it's just interesting, like, you know, Venus has some very, like, I don't know, there's like cliches about Venus and like these ideas about like femininity. And I just think it's interesting,
Yeah.
like, it talking about an exalted Venus, like that does not necessarily mean that you're a paragon of traditional femininity, which is interesting because we were just talking kind of about
Hmm.
overculture. And so like I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to think how like the way that we really reward like Aries sun energy, I think we really reward
Hmm.
Pisces Venus energy because like
Yeah.
we reward femininity that takes everything in.
Mm-hmm. And is sweet
Yeah.
and cute and like, yeah,
Yes.
the taking in as well.
Yeah, I've been also like doing a lot of work with Medusa for the book, and that's like that huge difference, the divide between the feminine and the masculine energies has been something I've been thinking about a lot because like I I've never been like super feminine, super girly, but I have been way more on that side, but I'm also very like very Aries in this like see me for my strength. Like I can lift people, I can lift things like small but mighty kind of energy. So it's like always been this weird like that conjunction has always just been such a ping pong battle for me. Because people are always just going to see me as this like super feminine little like cute little thing, and I'm always like, "No, but I'm strong and smart." And it's yeah, like it's such a weird placement, honestly.
Well,
That's
and
really
Venus, go ahead,
okay.
Hannah.
No, you go ahead.
Venus is so magnetic. And so when you're in that,
Yeah,
like whatever
yeah.
word we want to use, but that energy of more like receiving and letting things come to you and taking things in, if you have a
Mhm.
strong Venus, like Lori, literally, you've talked about how like you don't need to bring a lot of stuff with you when you travel because like everything you need will come to you. And one of the ways is it
Well,
comes
it's
to
in
you
my
through
ninth house.
community and through people and through travel, right? And so it's like a strong Venus can just pull things in to give you the resourcing you need
Yeah,
to do whatever she's in
that
charge of.
that's such a good point because I did want to bring that up too. I am the most chronically underpacked like person that's ever existed, but
Vouch
anytime
for that.
I've ever what?
I said I can vouch for that.
Yeah, when I
I
showed
can
up to
too.
Norwalk with a
Tiny
backpack.
carry-ons.
Yeah. Yeah, I bring absolutely nothing with me ever, anywhere. But anytime I need anything, it literally appears. Like one of my favorite stories about this was when I was at a hostel in Berlin in Germany, and I brought no like shampoo or anything. I brought nothing to wash my hair or anything with. And we're at a hostel and it like you had to bring all your own stuff. And we walk into this one bathroom and it was like fully stocked because somebody left their stuff in there. And my friend was like, "How do you do this?" And I was like, "I don't know." Like
That's so
I
Venusian
show
as
up.
well. The like
I
beauty
know it
products are
was
just there.
fully
Like
stocked. Yeah. But that's like what happens. It's so bizarre. Like, and I worked this event. My friend loves telling this story to everybody. I worked this event and showed up with only my deck of cards and my phone to do readings. And I was like, "Hi, I brought nothing." And then all of a sudden, people were like, "Do you need a tablecloth? Do you need a sign? Do you need like markers and pens and crystals?" And then all of a sudden, I had a whole setup. And he turned around and was like, "When did this happen?" And I was like, people just handed me things. Or like a place to stay has always been a big thing. Like I'll meet people and they're like, "Do you need a place to stay tonight when I'm traveling?" And I'm like, "I do, actually." So, yeah, it's like this chronically unprepared, but just like a full trust that it just works out. So that's definitely the Pisces Venus. Like that's the positive manifestation of how it's worked out for me. Can definitely vouch for that side.
Well, I was gonna transition into Mercury
Mm.
by the story,
Mm.
like we're talking about having an exalted Venus and how people like expect certain things of you, and you're like, no, but I'm Mars. Like, no, look it, I'm powerful and I'm strong
Yeah.
and I'm active. Um, so yeah, I was born with Mercury in Virgo, so it's in domicile and exalted. And
Mhm.
I have been, you know, I have I was a I spoke very early. I read very early. I've always been known as like a verbal kid. My mom
Mhm.
used to do this thing with me in kindergarten where I would like the older kids at my school would memorize poems and perform them. And so like at 5 years old, I was memorizing these like long lyric poems and then like performing them in front
I
of
love
the
that.
school. And like growing up, my parents were like, oh, you're gonna be a lawyer, which is like code for like you are such an argumentative little shit. Um, and just like everyone was like, oh, you're gonna be a writer, you're gonna be a writer. Well, of course I end up going to art school, and
Mhm.
the whole time I'm in art school, I'm like, no, but I'm like creative, and like I have this like whole other thing to offer. And I got told so many times in art school, like, but why don't you just go be a writer? Like that's what you're good at. Like
Yeah.
that, and I've pushed, it was like almost oppressive. It felt
Yeah.
imposed. Um and I am a writer by trade, like that's my job. Um but it's not like it's interesting how it's often been in tension with I often want to be perceived as um somebody more poetic, less um like
Technical?
technical. Yeah, thank you.
That's
Yeah.
so interesting too, to parse through the nuance of exaltation versus domicile. And what I said
Yeah.
at the beginning of an exalted planet is lifted up and is more visible. And then also the house placement of, your Mercury and Virgo being in the 11th, and that's the third best house, and it's more visible in the sky. Whereas your Venus in Libra, your artist self being hidden and tucked away in the 12th, and
Yeah.
not exalted, even though she's quite dignified. And then everyone sees the Mercury. Like it's like the Mercury is lifted up, and they're like, you should write.
My fifth house ruled by a fallen planet too. So it's just like when I did do art, everyone was like, not like that, you know. Um, oh, we
Not the
hate.
cultural expectation. Like if a dignified planet does what's culturally expected, the fallen planet is like, I'm not doing what you expect from me.
This is
Yeah.
a true at my final, like, art school, they like you go in front of a panel and present all your work, and the panel like asks you questions and talks about it, and you have to kind of defend it. And at this point I had been in like this is my MFA. I'd been in school for 3 years, and one of the professors on the panel was like, I don't know if this is art actually.
Who gets to say what is and is not art? I guess if you're an art professor, you might think you have that authority.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a fun story. But yeah, it is. But the other thing that's always been interesting is like I've always kind of been made fun of for my vocabulary. Like I would use a word
Mm.
school and someone would be like, what? What does that mean? And I would be like, oh, it means like I would be like, oh, well, it's like fluctuating. And they'd be like, what does that mean? I'd be like, oh, it means it like changes. They'd be like, well, why didn't you just say
Mm-hmm.
it that way? Like I was always sort of like made fun of for using big words.
So
Whereas like my
interesting.
friends, that makes me think of my friends with Mercury and Sag and Pisces and how they're the ones who are asking, what does that mean? And they just have like a to the point, not everyone, but the friends I'm thinking of, it's like their vocabulary works. They can say what they need to say, but they don't have like 1,000 giant words like a Mercury and Virgo native might.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Mm.
sure.
And just another thing that's so interesting about Mercury exalting in Virgo is the fact that Mercury is the only planet who exalts themselves, right? All the other planets are exalted by someone
Yeah.
else. And that just feels so on brand for Mercury. And I feel like that's
Like, I'll
like a
do it.
thing to go have like a bath and reflect on. Like, what does that mean that Mercury exalts themselves and does not necessarily even want to be lifted up by others and gives themselves their own resources? And then also, what does that mean for
Mhm.
Mercury and Virgo versus Mercury and Gemini? The fact that it's the Earth that like really grounds that Mercury energy. Like I think of
Mhm.
Virgo and especially Mercury and Virgo as mycelium and just this like mushroom network that
Mhm.
connects everything together and is
Mhm.
like really grounded in its ability. Like mycelium's an incredibly effective communication network, and Mercury loves
Yeah.
effective communication networks. And
I love
how the
that.
grounding of Virgo helps more than like Mercury and Gemini is so stimulating every time that transit happens. It's like, ah.
Well, and it's interesting because
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking like Virgo is very much like do it yourself. Like Gemini is the twins, so it's like I want to play. Whereas Virgo's like I'm in the one with the book at the party. Um
Right.
and is sort of like I make my own fun. I resource myself. Like I don't need anybody.
Mhm.
I'm a vestal virgin. Like I am hermetic. I'm like
Yeah.
I'm good, you
Well,
know.
yeah, I always think about and I know we talked about this a bit in the domicile episode too, but just to kind of revisit it, like Gemini to me is the like external of Mercury, whereas Virgo is the internal. So it's like inside the planet itself is Virgo sitting there like internalizing and thinking and letting it become little stomach issues. And then
Digesting.
Gemini, the digesting, quite literally. And then Gemini is like word vomit, right? Like it's literally just out there, like trying to see what drama it can cause, who it can poke, what it can do. Like it's just constantly like it's trickster energy. Like that's where I feel like the trickster Mercury really comes out because something about Virgo doesn't feel trickster Mercury. Like but Gemini like is trickster Mercury. Like there's like it's that duality of how it can bounce around, but then it can also ground and read and make sure it's actually correct.
Yeah. I feel like there's different qualities of light too. Like Gemini is at a time where the light is building,
Hmm.
Yeah.
whereas Virgo's at a time where the light is falling. So I always feel like
Mhm.
Virgo is a little more pessimistic, shall we say. Um
Mhm. It's
and
getting colder.
it's getting colder. It's like the harvest is coming.
Hmm.
And there's like an anxiety that comes with that. Um and a feeling of like needing to account for things or needing to prepare somehow. Um,
Yeah. The anxiety, it's like constantly feeling like it was never enough, which is so like that's a duality I think about a lot because of my Pisces Venus. Like I never have enough, but I'm always given what I need because I don't like to like bring extra because it weighs me down. Whereas Virgo, I feel like is like making sure it always has enough because it doesn't want to like bother anybody else by asking, almost. Like it's very like such an interesting axis in that way, where it's like the Pisces is like, it'll come. Like I trust it. Like the abundance of Jupiter versus the like, no, I have to like be prepared.
Well, and also the fact that Virgo just loves to improve things and is constantly looking
Right.
for a
That
way to
too.
make this better, make this more efficient, make this clearer. And so then when you have a
Hmm.
really strong Virgo, which you would if Mercury's there, and a really strong Mercury, like again, there's dignity, so hopefully you can find a way to mitigate this, but it like a shadow side of that can be just like you're always trying to fix stuff, right? Which is why, and this will be our next episode, but like why Venus is in fall. If she's exalted in Pisces, she's in fall in Virgo, because if you're constantly trying to
Hmm.
fix others and relationships,
Yep.
that's not as good as if you're
You're
like
always
a
picky.
computer programmer who's trying to fix your code to get the bugs out. Like that's what Mercury in Virgo wants to do. But that can be
Yeah.
incredibly anxiety inducing to like I feel like Mercury and Virgo is such tech bro energy of like a really successful tech bro who just like takes a ton of Adderall and codes all the time. Like again, I'm watching Silicon Valley right now, but it's like you're really successful and good at it, but like at what cost? That seems really hard on your body. That doesn't seem comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super. Yeah, I love that image. And it's also like Mercury is the deconstructor. Like
Mm,
if Jupiter is the like I'm gonna make everything whole. Have you ever seen I Heart Huckabees?
no.
Um, Definitely in my top 10 movies. It's a hoot. But there's these existential detectives played by Lily Tomlin and oh my God, Dustin Hoffman. And Dustin Hoffman is like the Jupiterian, and he's like, okay, here's my theory. It's like over here, like we have this blanket, and in the blanket we have like the Eiffel Tower and the plague and a hammer and an orgasm, and they're all the same thing because they're all the blanket. And that's, and then they have this like rival who is like she's played by Isabelle Huppert, who's very French and severe. And she's like, no, it's all suffering. It's all discrete and it's all human drama and it's all like, we're all separate. And I feel like that's Mercury versus Jupiter. Like Jupiter is the law and Mercury is the lawyer.
I like that. That's a really good way of wording that.
That's a really good differentiation.
People need lawyers and people like, but lawyers are not a very well loved profession.
Mhm.
There's such a necessity energy of Virgo, like doing what's necessary and also being of service to others.
Yeah. Everyone's entitled to defense. Someone's got to do it. Um,
Yeah,
I'm also just
makes sense.
pivoting a little, but I'm also thinking back to Lori's point at the beginning of the nocturnal or feminine signs exalting a lot more
Hmm.
planets than the like diurnal masculine signs. And I'm now realizing that all three Earth signs exalt a planet, because we'll get to the moon in Taurus in a second, but there's something really interesting about Earth
Yeah,
and exaltation that's coming through right now for me. So go take a
like
bath and mull it
yeah,
over.
material intelligence. Like I feel like Earth, like that's what Earth signs really value is like what is real in terms of the senses. Like
Hmm.
hmm,
and taste it,
yeah,
touch it, smell it, see it. It's real.
yeah. That's why I think about that all the time. Like,
Ability.
wow, those those feminine signs, they be exalting things.
Speaking of which, do we want to talk about Taurus and the moon?
Yeah,
Speaking of Earth signs.
Do it.
totally.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so I guess my progressed moon is currently in Taurus, which has been interesting. It's been forcing me to slow down a bit. My progressed MC just moved there too, like this year, just a few months ago. So, yeah, I've been learning a lot about how my emotions are becoming a little more clear. because the moon is my first house. And I feel like moon in Taurus is like a really good, like, it's a good shell for that almost. Like, how about we just enjoy food? How about we be okay with spending some money on things and having the nicer version of it? That's been something that I'm now realizing is probably very much connected to that exalted moon. But like I said, my Chiron, I have, like, always had a really hard time with spending my money. Like, I've just always been very, like, if I spend it, I won't have it, and it's been, like, really hard for me. But this past year, I've been really realizing that, like, if I want to be the person that I want to be, I need to travel more, and I need to put myself out there more, and I need to meet people in the communities, and I need to make connections, and I need to talk to everybody I possibly can, and do all these things that are very ninth house and which is, where the ruler of my 11th is, where that Venus is. And I think the moon kind of entering Taurus has made it easier for me to be like, oh, well, it's okay to spend a little bit more for comfort or like it's okay to actually do that. Like it'll be okay. And it has been okay. And it's been such a weird, I guess, lesson for me in that, because that definitely is related. Whereas my regular, like my Aries moon, um, I don't think about eating or sleeping or things like that. Usually I'm just constantly just like, what do I feel like doing? But I think that Taurus has kind of like slowed me down a bit.
Yeah. And to just like really hammer in the Hellenistic technique of if you
Yeah.
really want to understand how these sorts of planetary energies are showing up in your life, look to the topics of the house or houses that that planet rules in your chart, right? And so the moon rules Cancer, and Lori being Cancer rising, like she's going to feel her progressed moon in Taurus in like every aspect of her life, like how she shows up in the world, how she interacts with the world, like all of those ascendant things are going to like be really loud because the moon rules the first house. So just always look to the house that the planet rules.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely been affecting me. Like I feel it.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about Taurus and the moon and like the rhythms of life. Like I was thinking about that with the sun
Hmm.
too, and like how Jason Holly talks about solar consciousness and like day consciousness and night consciousness.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and how like it's almost, yeah, the exaltation of like night consciousness and um I think about like biodynamic farming or something like that being that sort of you know, that idea of rhythms and cycles and everything sort of having its season and letting the energy, like the energy having a natural rise and fall. um and how um Taurus being the sort of earthy expression of Venus, it kind of, it's almost like the embodiment is also what's related to the moon is like the body wax, because the body waxes and wanes
Yeah.
as well.
But it's also so interesting to me because I'm in this class about the Orphics and the Orphic hymns with Kristen Mathis and Drew Levanti right now, which has just been stupendous. And I would recommend to everyone. I'll link to Kristen's Substack down below because she's been just doing incredible work translating the Orphic hymns.
Thank
And
you.
yes, we started with the Orphic hymns to Rhea and the moon. And I wish I'd taken that class. Like I want to do like an
Mhm.
updated Rhea episode, honestly, because Lori and I did an episode on Rhea and I've like learned so much from this class about Rhea. And honestly, I should be praying to Rhea right now with my Saturn return. I think she could really help. But in the lunar
Love her.
Orphic hymn, there's this line that Kristen's translated that she translated as "you rejoice in stillness." And I was in the class discussion and I'm like, what? Like the moon moves around the sky in 28 days and is constantly fluctuating and waxing and waning. Like she rejoices in stillness. Like I don't understand that. And then someone pointed out, well, the moon's exalted in Taurus. And there is something about like the moon being such a
Yeah.
fluctuating, ever-changing planet, like the grounding earthy stability that Taurus brings that can just really like allow her to like root in. And like, you know, your body does well when you move slowly and you eat regularly and you engage in pleasure and all of these very like Taurus, Tauresian, that's a word, sort of
Yeah.
energies. Like Hannah, do you know with your
Sure.
Mercury? But that's a word. But yeah, it's like the
Mm.
stillness, the fixed energy, the earthiness of Taurus really gives the
Mm.
moon a lot of support.
Substance too, yeah.
Substance, absolutely.
Substance.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also
That was
thinking about how I have a friend who has moon in Taurus, and I actually don't know their whole chart. So I wonder if there's like aspects going on here that are making this stronger too. But one time they told me that they have to like make an intentional effort to feel their feelings, which feels very moon and Capricorn as well, like an earth moon, just like being like, okay, I have to sit
yeah.
down and feel right now. And that's sticking with me because my Pisces moon is like, oh man, feelings are very available. And again, I wonder there might have been aspects or something there too, but that might also be part of the shadow side of like an exalted moon in Taurus, like the earthiness, you know, because the moon rules Cancer, like she is a very watery planet,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
there being something about like, what do your emotions do when they're put in fixed earth? It's just,
So
Yeah.
actually, funny you say that. That's something I think about a lot because as an Aries moon, my emotions come really fast and go really fast. And so there's been a lot of times where I've felt something come on like really, really strongly, like anger or sadness, or like I wanted to cry. But there's been this part of me that's like, "Oh, I'm not in a space where I can do that right
mm,
now." So, I've always wanted to, like, pack it aside for later. Like, let's feel this feeling tonight when I'm home, but then I get home tonight and I'm, like, wired, and I'm like, "I don't feel that feeling anymore. I don't wanna feel it." And with this progressed Taurus moon, that's been something I've actually been really working on is like I have had a lot of anger come up, but it always seems to come up when I'm in like unsafe place or not unsafe, but like in places where I can't really express it or do anything about it. And then I never do anything about it because
mm,
I forget in 10 minutes. And so I'm like really scared of this, like, of these trapped emotions getting stuck in my body. So I've been like, since this progressed Taurus moon, I've been really trying to intentionally be like, no, we're going to feel this. And like, I'm trying to almost like force myself into it. Because it's like you felt anger yesterday and now you're allowed to feel it. And it's like, obviously, I don't still feel it, but I'm like trying to like do anything I can to like reignite it almost. So I definitely see what you're talking about. I
mm.
have both with the fire.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then the incongruence of like Aries and Taurus cannot see each other. So someone
Right,
naturally with either an
right.
Aries or a Gemini moon or, you know, Libra or Sag, which like a Taurus moon by progression would be like, what? Because it's just like so it's like a,
Yeah,
unseen from what you are familiar with.
right. Yeah, it's been weird.
There's also something about like comfort and stability and building wealth with
Mm.
Taurus and the moon. Like
Yeah,
a lot of people I know with Taurus moons, like don't move, like have been in the same apartment
yeah.
for 15
It's
years
so
or
true.
you know,
Mm.
it's like when you're always moving, you don't accumulate
Yeah,
because you're shedding constantly. But when you live in a place, you know, I think about my parents or whatever, or like you see people who've lived in the same home for like 20 years and it's like, "Oh, you got stuff." Like
yeah,
you built up a comforting nest of your things, of
yeah.
tangible evidence of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another interesting like way that Taurus translates the moon.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because like the moon waxes and wanes, and especially like all three of us live in an American cultural context, and our context just loves the waxing and the accumulating and the growing and the taking in and holding, and so does Taurus. um and so then it's like, what does that do to the moon when, like in Cancer, in her own sign, where it's like fully their own resources to bring about their significations, you do the waxing and the waning and the growing and the shedding. But then in Taurus, like I wonder if Taurus moons might struggle with more of the waning side of that lunar cycle.
They
Would
definitely
depend
do.
on the phase and stuff, but yeah. Sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I've had a lot of Taurus moons in my life. Well, and I also really heavily associate the moon with like nutrients and food
Mm-hmm.
and like intake, because also like Cancer rules the stomach and like the breasts where your like first food comes from, and it like nurtures the baby because it's that like mother figure. And then Taurus like rules the throat, which is like food intake
Mm.
as like more of an adult version of it, I guess. So like there is such a strong tie to food with both of those placements, and I see it come out in like everyone I've ever done a reading for or know personally who's a Taurus moon. Like they're always bakers or singers, or
Mm.
they love to cook, or there's always this like really comforting thing that like those things come really naturally to them. And talk about sugar. I feel like sugar and Taurus moon is like almost maybe on par-ish with the Pisces Venus too. Like
Totally.
it always feels like that's been a thing for the Taurus moons I know too. Um, but yeah, there's this like, and Cancer has that energy, but not like as much as Taurus moons. I feel like there's such a strong energy around the throat. Like they're always baking, singing, talking, creating poetry. Like there's something always related back to this idea of speech or food, um, or like smoking habits or something. Like there's always just something.
There's something too about like the tides, the moon and the tides, and you think about Cancer, the crab. So like the tides come
Mhm.
in and out. So like you can go from it being dry to being wet to having a high water level. And like a crab, like the solution for the crab is like it is evolved to go both on land and water. But then you have something
Yeah.
like a cow that is like massive enough to withstand like a lot of pull and push. You know what I mean? Like it takes a lot
Yeah.
to move something that's sturdy. And so I think about that like a way of like
Yeah.
withstanding the lunacy that of the tides and the emotions and like the crescendos and then the pulling back, and that the moon can kind of be responsible for.
That's beautifully said, Hannah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. I like that imagery.
I just think about
One,
it standing in the ocean by itself.
Just a
And that's all
cow
that can
hanging out in the
see.
ocean, like, I'm not moving. I live here now.
the waves are crashing over and it can handle it.
Yeah, he's just like, no, I got myself here. I'm living with it.
One other super interesting thing about the Taurus Scorpio axis is the fact that no planet is fallen in Taurus, where the moon exalts, and then
Yeah,
no planet exalts in Scorpio, or no planet
yeah,
exalts in Scorpio where the moon falls. And so there's something about this axis where the moon is exalted and falls, where like no other planet can do the opposite almost, because like the moon, she translates the energy from the celestial skies. Whichever planets the moon is aspecting in your birth chart or in daily transits are the planets that are going to come through the loudest. So it's like you couldn't exalt a planet in a place where the moon falls, and you can't put a planet in fall in a place where the moon is exalted.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to me too, like going into that whole like diurnal, nocturnal sign thing. Like Scorpio is the only one that doesn't have an exaltation. It's the only sign, only feminine, only diurn or
Hmm.
nocturnal sign that has nothing, no exalted planet. But then that like Libra Aries axis is the only active ones. So it's like that's such a weird dichotomy that like it's almost like that Mars energy.
Venus, yeah.
Yeah, Mars, Venus. Yeah, it's so
It is
interesting.
interesting. That also makes me think of another technical thing you can work with is when you're looking at how your planets are, um, if they're not in their own sign, then you need to look at who the planet that rules them is to get additional information. Like if you have your moon in Taurus,
Mhm.
look at where your Venus is in your chart to gain more understanding of how your moon in Taurus is playing out and like what's going on. But you can also
Yeah.
look to the exalted lord of your sign. So, like, if you have any planet in Taurus, you can then look to the moon as a secondary. Like, you would look at Venus because Venus rules Taurus, but then you can also look at the
Hmm.
moon because she's the exalted lord of Taurus. And that can be a mitigating thing if maybe the ruler of your sign is in
Yeah.
difficult condition. It'll give additional information. Like, the moon has a lot of governance over Taurus because she is the exalted lord there. Like Jupiter has a lot of governance over Cancer because she is the exalted lord there, right? So that's an additional technical thing that you can work with as well astrologically from a Hellenistic perspective.
Hmm.
Thank you. That's cool.
Yeah.
I just thought of that because my Venus in Scorpio, I'm like, oh, doesn't work for me. No exalted lord. Like, that's not a helper.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. Hmm.
Any other thoughts?
Oh, I was thinking about how exaltation, like, there's something almost like ecstatic about it. Like, it can be a loss of control in some ways because you're not expected to have.
Hmm.
You're almost like like being egged on. Again, you're at the party and people are
Yeah.
like chug 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 chug. You know.
Yeah.
Um.
Yeah. Actually, that's yeah, such I have a funny story with that because I have a friend who has a lot of exalted placements and like we went out to dinner for her birthday once and it was a Mexican restaurant, so I assumed that they were gonna like bring around, they had the whole drum situation and I was like I'm gonna embarrass her. But I like told them it was her birthday and they brought over this huge thing of alcohol and like kept pouring it into her mouth and she like she's yeah, she, like, didn't want that, and I just kind of was looking at it, like, shocked, like, that was a lot that they just poured on her, and I, like, have thought about that moment a couple times. It was a couple of years ago, but I, like, think about that with exalted placements all the time, where it was just I just wanted to embarrass her, like, I just wanted to be like, "Oh, here, like, it's her birthday," but I didn't think they were gonna come over and, like, pour an entire bottle of, like, vodka down her throat, like, it was so unnecessary, it was, like, so overdone, but I was like, "That is so the culture that we live in," like, that is just, like, okay to do without even asking if somebody wanted that, and or, like, give her a shot, you know what I mean? Like, give her something for free, like, whatever happened
Yeah.
to ice cream? Like, it was just such a weird
Or
situation. What?
whatever happened to
What'd you say?
comping.
Right, right, like, or something that you would want, but it just yeah, it felt like such a weird way of handling that, and I was like, "That is such a, like, exalted" at least, like, my exalted Venus, like, that's how I feel sometimes, where I'm just like, "It's my birthday," and then they're like, "Here you go," and you're like, "I didn't want that."
Well, because when you have a really strong planet, like same with domicile, but I feel like it might be even
Mhm.
more with exaltation. That's like a very strong god working their energy
Yeah,
through you is one way to look at it.
right.
And like we're mere mortals, like a super strong Venus, like channeling, it's like Jason Hawley will talk a
Yeah.
lot about electrical, like toning down the electrical signal. Like if you, I don't know how
Mm-hmm.
electricity works, but if you took like the power from a power plant and tried to
Yeah.
like plug it into your wall, you would burst the surge. And so you have to like manage the energy. And it's like an exalted planet can
Yeah.
be like just too much for what your circuit can handle sometimes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's kind of that's again the feminine sign of it. It's like holding it, taking it and holding it. How do you receive?
Right.
How do you become the
Right.
receiver for that?
Right. The receiver, but also like how do you be the receiver if it's unwanted? Like how do you still speak up? Because it definitely like it can be a lot of whatever it is, which can be a really great thing. Like I've definitely had really amazing times where I've been like, oh, thank God for that Pisces Venus. Like, you know, making random things that I needed appear. But like, then there's been times where I'm like, oh my God, stop looking at me.
Yeah, and if you've never had to like if you've received everything, that you're not like you don't have that muscle of like how to deal with
Yeah.
adversity or struggle or scarcity or strange
Mhm.
being, like um
Mm-hmm.
that's something we can talk about in the detriment and fall, but
Mhm.
there's like a
Yes.
scrappiness and a creativity that can come with a lack of dignity and much like
Mm-hmm.
trines. It's like stuff often that you take for granted where it's like, I don't know, maybe you have all this musical talent, but like you just don't care. It's like other people would
Yeah.
kill for it.
Right. Yeah. Well, but why would you care if you didn't have to work hard for it?
Makes me think of like kids in college whose parents pay and then they just skip all their classes because it's like they don't think about how much money that actually is because they're not having to work for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why like spoiled rich kid is very much how I like to think about resourced placements.
That goes back to the
Because
privilege point that
the
we'd been
privilege,
making
yeah.
earlier as well. And there's a lot of nuance to unpack there that, this episode is focused on exaltation and we've been here for a while. But, that would be a very fascinating like rabbit
Yeah.
hole to go down in another episode someday.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
That's definitely something I feel like we could talk about forever.
Yeah. Well, should we wrap up? Any final thoughts before
Yeah.
we Cool. Well, what do you have going on right now,
Yeah.
Hannah? Like, do you want to share anything of what's going on?
Well, if you're in the Portland area, I'm going to be performing in Peninsula Park this Saturday as part of Time is Queer, Time is a Quackery. I'll be giving a little performance, and then on August 10th, I'll be part of the Solar System drag show. I'll be reading at the Maker Faire before the event at the Clinton Street Theater. So you can catch me either of those places, and you can also find me online at hannahpiperburns.com or Instagram at baby_baba_yaga.
And we'll have the links to Hannah's stuff down in the show notes so you can go down there and click on over.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's so nice talking to you both.
Yeah, it's such a treat to have you on.
Absolutely.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
And what do you have going on, Lori?
Um, yeah, so I have finally gotten that wave of inspiration with the book. It's been like 2 years of sitting with it and writing like 10,000 words. And now for whatever reason, since I got home from Demetra's retreat, I've written it's like at 80,000 as of today. So it's been crazy. I've been really deep in research and talking to a lot of really amazing people who have been willing to share their stories. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at right now is I'm trying to share as much and put as much as I can into a resource for everybody to have. The book has changed about 10 million times what I've wanted it to be, but it feels like it's kind of becoming more of an almost like an encyclopedia of like case studies of how asteroids play out for people. Plus the mythology and the stories and interpretation and everything. So, yeah, I'm trying to give voice to as many of them as humanly possible. So I've been really trying to just collect any bit of wisdom, any bit of knowledge. I've been trying to really channel and work with the goddesses individually. So if anybody has stories they want to share or anything you want to shoot me a message and tell me about, I have been including a lot of stories, but I'm also like, I want to make it really clear if you want to be more private, I can keep it. I've had a couple of people be like, don't put my placements in there, just say it's conjunct my sun or whatever. So I have had a few that I've been very vague about what their charts were, but still using the example story. And then I've had some that were just like, blast my chart. So I've had a good mix of both. Um, but yeah, other than collecting that, I've really just been reading, researching, working with the shop, hosting or planning some events to be hosting. Tarot school is in full swing. It's gonna be in September, October again. And I think I'm gonna have like an online version of it, probably over Zoom if anybody wants to join who's not local to Cincinnati, but it is gonna be in person. Um, so yeah, I'm kind of just in planning and writing mode right now. Still doing readings though too, so
So exciting. Just doing all the things.
all the things. And then
What
what
about you,
about
Lee?
you?
I am just kind of continuing with what I have been working on. I offer astrology readings and personalized herbal teas, which you can order and book through my website. And I do a lot of writing about different herbs and materia medica posts about the medicinal properties of different herbs. I've written about 24 of those now. And so if you go to the My Writing section of my website, there's a link. It's called Resources to learn more about herbs, and it has links to all of my posts as well as information on good herbal books that you could get as well if you want to learn more about herbs. And I also have some writing on ancestral veneration and how to talk to plants and just being part of the dispersal of information. So, yeah, please reach out, book a reading, check out my blog posts, listen to our podcast, follow our podcast on Instagram. We have a Conversations with the Planets Instagram page. We'd love to have you guys follow, reach out, comment, all the things. So it's just great to hear from fans of the pod.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it. So we'll wrap up and just thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.